All right, you can hear me okay? All right, let's do this, gang. Come on, we've got this. So, welcome everyone. We're here to talk about purpose-driven marketing. Just that small topic, which we've already been hearing a little bit about, and I'm thrilled to be joined by this wonderful group of people, Jaclyn, Todd, and Jeff. I'm just going to start by having you guys introduce yourselves, and perhaps just by way of introduction, tell us a little bit about the role that purpose has played in your careers to date. Jaclyn, take it away.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Jaclyn Ranere. I'm the CMO of Sofar Sounds. I've spent my career in entertainment and media, actually at the trade desk just prior to this, so shout out to Patrick and everyone at the trade desk. Purpose is incredibly important for Sofar. So we create intimate concerts all around the world. We're in 78 countries. We have about 75 to 125 people at all of our shows. To date, this year, we've put on about 1,000 concerts. So it's a high volume. It started in living rooms in London because our founder wanted to make sure that artists had a place to play where music mattered. And so often you'll go to see amazing concerts and amazing artists, and the person next to you is talking, or people are clanging beer bottles. And so Sofar started so that artists would have a place to play and fans would have a chance to really understand the music. And so for us, our purpose of creating space where music matters defines everything that we do and how we present ourselves to the world.
That's great.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff McAdams. I am Vice President of Global Marketing for New Balance. In keeping with the theme of Chris this morning and Tracy, I've been here for some time. Celebrated my 12th anniversary last month. In terms of purpose at New Balance, we consider ourselves very much a purpose-driven company, and I'll get into some specifics of that over the course of the next half hour. Purpose drives our strategy on the commercial side, which is New Balance Athletics, the company or the division that I work for. It definitely drives everything around our philanthropic giving through the New Balance Foundation, and it's also driven through the strategy of the New Balance Development Group, which was the group that was responsible for building this building. So purpose is a word that we talk about and live daily at New Balance. A little bit more timely, I participated in a cross-functional effort last year to define our purpose in very succinct terms that I'll share some more details about. So this is a very timely topic for us here at MB.
Great. My name's Todd Sperry. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at the Museum of Science. And New Balance was once upon a time my favorite client, and still is my favorite former client. And I came from advertising for about 12 years, where I was lucky enough to manage global brands that really did have purpose at their core, whether it was Volvo, which was about safety, New Balance, certainly social justice and production, US, long list of amazing things, and Timberland, which had an amazing footprint as well. All private companies and all real pleasures to work with. One of my former partners on this, Maggie, who worked with both Jeff and I, said, there's this position over at the Museum of Science. You should go talk to them. And I was like, I'm not going to a nonprofit, and I'm certainly not going to a museum. I think I'm a member, but it's a content engine that's worth exploring. And the closer I got to what the museum was doing and the purpose and the value of STEM learning and the purpose of really engaging and inspiring people in lifelong love of science, that became really compelling. And so I've been there for 6 years. We can answer a little bit more, Jeff and I and Jaclyn, about where and how mission and vision drove what we're doing, and then importantly, how to drive that through an organization. But it's nice to be back.
That's great. Thank you. What an amazing set of brands, companies, and verticals for this conversation. Music, sports, fitness, and also science and education. It's incredible. Now, of course, purpose is a very loaded term. It's been thrown around for the last decade. Some companies have embraced it very well. There's been less successful efforts. Maybe just talk to me a little bit about your interpretation of purpose and purpose-driven marketing and what makes for a strong purpose at the core of your brand. Todd, take it away.
I think for the museum, it's asking the question, why do we exist? And we're in the business of public science learning. We're not in the business of running a venue or opening a door. We still have a physical museum that's 1.5 million people. That's a puzzle of its own, but that's not really the purpose. And as we think about curricula, we see more kids through curricula than we ever will in the floor of the museum. And we think about online learning and online engagement. We do more there than we'll ever do in schools. So thinking about why does one exist, and then galvanizing an organization around an idea. And in our case, when we reset this 2 years ago, inspiring a lifelong love of science, that became an organizing principle for everybody in the organization to see themselves participating in that in ways that are relevant to people where they are. It's very different than running a earned revenue, attendance-driven machine. That's a business model most of our peers operate in. We looked at it as a very different thing. Purpose, vision, mission become ways to actually engage one's colleagues, and in our case, the board, in being a part of something, and then working towards something. And then we'll talk about metrics and how do you stay on this, because I see it almost in our case where I don't have these New Balance budgets. I miss those. But we very much see this as helping to drive what we do, how we do it, where we deliver, and importantly, how we measure impact along the way.
That's great. Thanks, Todd. I love that notion of purpose being a North Star, and we'll talk more about that. Jaclyn, I know you've got
I would
great
just add that it's not just, for us, it's not just why we exist, it's also who we exist to serve. So we are a multi-sided marketplace, so we have, obviously, music lovers pay tickets to see our shows, but ultimately we're serving the artist. And so when we think about our purpose, that's really what has driven how we frame everything that we do, whether it's the types of venues that we're in, that we have our shows in, because they're all non-traditional venues, or the partners that we have. I know there's been so much talk about partners today, such an important part of any marketing team. Everything that we do, new business ventures, M&A, all of that is very much driven by who we serve and what our purpose is.
And I would pick up, I'll start by saying New Balance's purpose, the 18 words that we distilled it down to is independent since 1906. We empower people through sport and culture to create positive change in communities around the world. And it's for us, and to answer your question, I think purpose is first best not over-explained. Like it is, I completely agree. It's your core reason for being. It's different than mission. It's different than strategy. And for us, it's put to use every day. Chris talked about the importance of partnerships in elevating New Balance to where we are today. Each of the partners that you're going to hear from, and we've had some great partners so far with Figs, Joe Robinson and Joe Fresh Goods tomorrow. Certainly Gabby Thomas, the Olympian, will be here tomorrow. All of those individuals were first looked at in terms of a purpose fit. Were they living their lives, and was their mission and was their personal goals in line with where we were seeking to go? If no, okay. If yes, then we should talk about partnership. And it's hard, but you have to have a metric and a filter to define partnerships, and purpose sits right at the front of those decisions for us.
That's right. And how about a round of applause for Jeff for remembering all 18 words? What you can't see from that side is it's actually just written on his hand here. Yeah. We were tossing around this HBR article, and look at me quoting HBR in Boston. Is that how you do it? I think it's make up for my New York merchandise here. And they described purpose as operating within three different, buckets. There's a competence purpose, so the function that your product serves. There's a culture purpose, the intent with which we run our business. And then there's a cause, the social good we aspire to. How do you feel about that? Those three different definitions. Do you think it's okay for a purpose not always to be about changing the world, or does it have to always have some element of social good to be a true purpose for the business?
Yeah, I'm going to answer a partly different question because you mentioned world, and that is in our purpose. Purpose can change. Okay, so I stick with the idea that it is your core reason for being, but it can change. 116 years ago, if we were writing the purpose for New Balance, we never would have put world in it. Okay, Values don't change. Okay, our values, quality, teamwork, total customer satisfaction, those are immovable, and we will never change those. But purpose can evolve. So I think that the HBS definition I think has some merit, but again, I think you get right back to distill it down. It's an excavation exercise. It's not a creative exercise to define your purpose.
That's right. That's great. And then I was curious to hear more. I mean, you've all touched upon the strong purposes that you've developed at each of your companies. Maybe you can just talk a little bit about the process. How did you get to those the different purposes, and how do you arrive at a strong purpose that the whole organization is able to really grasp hold of? Maybe Jaclyn, take it away.
Sure. So I was very fortunate that when I started at Sofar, not even a year ago, I was delivered a brand book and a purpose. And so I went back and looked at all of the documentation and all of the process that everyone had gone through, and it starts internally. It starts with interviewing all of your stakeholders, really understanding what the business means to everyone, articulating where you want to go and who you serve, and then making sure that you get buy-in from everyone. And so we're at the point now where we still have not, I would say, officially launched our purpose. We talk about it. We have a lot more work which we're about to embark on making sure that it really resonates with everyone and that it carries through everything that we do. Even next week we have an offsite, an executive session, and we're going to start just throwing some of our upcoming projects against our purpose to make sure that that the purpose sticks and that the projects stick as well.
That's great. And Jeff, I know you have a really interesting story about how the New Balance process.
Yeah, so for us, last year when the decision was made that we wanted to articulate our purpose, I think the first and most important decision we made was that we didn't look at it as a marketing exercise. In fact, we deliberately chose someone outside of marketing to lead the process. And in our case, it was a product merchandising manager out of Brazil, out of our LATAM division, Rodrigo Milru. And what Rodrigo did was he led a cross-functional initiative where there were department heads and department leaders across 6 divisions. Okay, so 5 commercial divisions plus New Balance Foundation. So this was a purpose that was intended to be an umbrella over the entire enterprise. And then it was just time and effort. Over the course of about 3 months, probably 10 meetings. I think we counted about 20 versions of the purpose statement before we felt it was right and true. And then from there, it became imperative that it be rolled out at a senior level first. Okay, so for us, just to get into some specifics, it was done through everything was digital then, less so now, but a digital global town hall from our executive team. It was then put into the hands of individual department heads. Okay, so our head of, our chief operating officer had the purpose, and he, like his colleagues at that level, were then charged with taking the purpose down into very specific KPIs on how their function can support the purpose. And so we're now post 9 months launch. We all have KPIs, marketing as well, that we will start to track on an annual basis. So it's something that, the old adage of, you manage what you measure. We're being very deliberate about making sure that our purpose is not something that gets filed away.
That's great. Yeah, there's a good switch there, or tipping over from launching the purpose into how it then takes hold within an organization and how you keep that alive. Todd, I know you also went through a similar process.
We did, and we had a new president come in January of 2020, and the pandemic, you'll recall, was February 2020, and the Museum of Science was shut down for 6 months in March of 2020. So in our case, that became an interesting opportunity. I've certainly looked back on it, and it was all the things you can imagine for a place that derives over half our revenue from on-site operations and just being shut down. So that was very, very difficult, but also opened up a period of deep thinking. So one of the things you do need, Jeff said, is time. You do need time to build this stuff right, and you need to engage everybody. And in our case, it's not just our staff and colleagues, it's the people and organizations to whom you serve. And so building time to understand what is the purpose of the Museum of Science in this community. And building, we had a process that went through several listening sessions, several drafting sessions. We also did town halls. At that point, we were doing weekly town halls. And there's a lot of tools you can use to get yourself there. And it took a year. The other thing, so time's important. The other thing is it's important to know who the decision maker is. It is not a process by which you just spirit out everything you've ever heard and it's a democracy. It's actually not. And so I think if you're clear about decision making at the front end, things actually work a lot better. And so listening, deep listening, iteration, and then working with the community you serve, to whom you serve, that's how you get there. And in a pandemic, some things went faster, and then some things went slower. But I think for us, changing the existence of a museum or the purpose of a museum itself. The museum industry itself has been going down in attendance for 25 years. So you have to really redefine what even is a museum. How do we move from visitors to users? How do you move from being a place to an idea? How do you move from being exhibits that you see once when your in-laws are in town to being an integral part of one's experience? So we operate a little bit more like, I don't know, libraries probably had these discussions 30 years ago. So lots more to say about that. We should talk about metrics in a minute, but that to me was some of the things that made it work for us.
That's great. And Jaclyn, I know we were talking about change, and obviously the museum went through a ton of change. Maybe just talk a little bit about how you evolved the purpose when you heard more from the artists and more from the fans, because a purpose isn't something that just necessarily is written down on a piece of paper and set in stone for the rest of eternity, right?
Yeah. So our purpose, part of it came out of that we realized we weren't being clear enough internally with who we were serving and what we were trying to accomplish. And so if you look up, so I don't do this, but if you were to Google Sofar Sounds and you went deep in Google, you would see some articles written about accusations that we don't pay artists for their performances. We absolutely pay artists. They get paid a very great rates for the performances that they're giving to us. And so it became clear through that, seeing what the external feedback and the perception of Sofar was, knowing everyone knew internally who we were serving, but we hadn't really made it clear. And so that was the tipping point for actually saying, okay, let's sit down and reform our purpose so that it does cover what we're trying to accomplish and who we're serving, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts on the type of company that we are.
That's great. And Todd, you teed it up nicely. I'd love to talk a little bit about the value that a good purpose can have for an organization. What is that value? And also, truly, how can you measure it? Jeff, I know you mentioned that New Balance, the KPIs of everybody is tied back to your purpose, but what are some other ways that you can measure the value of your purpose?
I think as a marketer, I'm always going to start with the consumer. And so, what do your consumers say? And so for us, our first KPI was to, or I should say our first KPI came from a global survey that we did at the end of this process last year in all of our top markets, basically just to fact check us. This is what we say and who we say we are and are about. Do you agree? And we got responses, and by and large they did, but that sets a baseline that we can then track against. So for marketing, that's KPI 1. The other KPIs include we work with all of our regions. You had a chance to hear from Tracy Nauer this morning. Tim Malone, our international marketing director, is here, and we work very closely to ensure that all of our regions are participating in what we define as 5 cultural moments. Okay, so our marketing calendar, January to December, includes cultural moments that begin with Black History Month in February. It ends with the New York City Marathon. I see your jacket, very nice. In the fall, and in between is Earth Day, International Women's Day, and Pride. And so 100% inclusion of those in all demand generation is another metric. And so these are things that we can track. And the third one is, and I referenced our partners earlier, we expect 100% charitable give back and community outreach among our partners. And again, that's something that we track. So those make up the 3 marketing KPIs that we put in place last year.
I think on our side, we do a number of outcomes work and research. It's crazy, when I got here, there's a bigger research and evaluation team at the Museum of Science than marketing team. I thought, whoa, this is different. But looking at learning outcomes and trying to understand where and how a moment of inspiration translates years later is tough. But because we are in so many spheres, we do measure just about everything we do. We prototype everything we make. We test and measure outcomes for different types of learners, and a balanced scorecard approach to the portfolio is super important. It's actually really hard to communicate or figure out how it all relates, especially when you have like a Michael Bloomberg who cites the Museum of Science as the most important teacher he ever had because he came every Saturday. Now that's something that's pretty hard to measure, but that is something that translated directly to a life. Astronauts say the same thing. Nobel Prize winners say the same thing. How do you measure that? Tougher. But the other thing I think that's worth measuring is internally, and we talked a little bit about KPIs, and looking to see how we organize ourselves. And in museum land, it's usually, we just make cool stuff. That's how a lot of museums operate. We have really tried to put in a system called the OKR system, Objectives, Key Results. And it's John Doerr, it's not new, everybody uses it from Intel. And it is incredible what it has done to galvanize. There are 5 OKRs, everybody in the organization knows them for the year, and then every division, every department, and every person, down to the person who takes your ticket, has 5 of their own OKRs that we have to rate every 4 months. And they have to be far-reaching, and they have to be ambitious, and they have to ladder up somehow to the organization. You can imagine in a museum, not everybody loves that. And here, that would be more well adopted, I suspect. But it's been a really powerful tool, and it helps us stay aligned. So that's how I'm taking mission and actually making it actionable. That's the really hard part to do. So OKRs, look them up. They're great. My boss is not watching, but he should. But this is something that's hard work, and it's taken a year and a half, and we still have people still getting on board. The other thing is transparency. Every person in our organization has them. We can all look at each other's. We can all pressure test them or maybe challenge them. But at least it's vernacular and some common language about what we're trying to do. So I would encourage something like that to live alongside more of the ethereal, mission stuff that we all are attracted to. But figure out, how do you implement it? That's a lot harder.
I was really sort of inspired by the story from LL Bean about the 15 minutes a day, getting outside for 15 minutes a day, and the 200,000 people who took part in that challenge. What are some of the ways that for each of your brands, as you've launched your purpose, you can see that it's having an impact for your customers or for other stakeholders in the business? For example, this building that we're currently sitting in.
Yeah, maybe we start with the obvious one. I mean, we talk about changing the communities in which we live and work. That's kind of the part 3 of our 3-part purpose statement. This, I don't think I'm disclosing anything here, but this type of a building doesn't make money. This was an investment in the community. I live about 9 miles west of here. This place opened 3 weeks ago. I've already heard 3 or 4 times from friends who have children who have come here for events, and that's going to repeat itself for years to come. As marketers, we're putting this, we're looking at this through an asset lens, so how can we turn this into global communications? And I think Tracy did a really good job articulating, how we turned, this Boston-based facility into something that was globally discussed and still being globally discussed, over the past 3 weeks. And so purpose has value. It's not just the right thing to do. It has real, recordable, measurable business value.
So our purpose manifests in every single show that we have, as I mentioned earlier. So I feel very fortunate that it is that way, and that it's very easy for us to be purpose driven. One of the results that we see of that is when we do survey different portions of our community, our artists love the fact that they can walk into a Sofar room that we fill with fans, and that we fill with fans who are going to pay attention. And that is so rare for them to get that attentive audience and to be able to just look at people, because it is a small room, and see the reaction. And then on the flip side, you see that from the people who buy tickets as well, that when you see their posts on social media, and we have a very not strict, but you come, you enjoy this show, you participate. We encourage you to post on social media, but you should not stand there with your phone and record everything and then be disengaged with
and
the
then
show.
Never watch it.
Exactly.
Right? When do you ever watch those videos? Yeah.
And so when they do post, there are these short clips, and you can feel their excitement about the experience that they had because of that environment and because of our purpose.
That's great.
I think another piece of that is experience, and delivering cool experiences that signal what matters, like this building. I've never been in here, but it screams performance, awesomeness, special. I look at Ian, and I think about creating super special experiences around footwear or clothing or whatever it is, something that has a bit of an insider that says, I understand you, I'm going to make something or create a concert experience that's cool. we do things that like reset our own expectations of what we have for like asset exploration, where we run a planetarium, we have an Omni, we have all these things. We turned the planetarium into a venue. And now when artists call, and I get messages saying, how do we play the Dome for a minute? I was like, what does that even mean? And what that is whether it's hip hop or indie or chamber music, whatever, we've turned that space into a performance space. And that becomes a cool thing for the artist. And if you give the artist something cool, the audience definitely vibes off that. Now that's an asset that sits there at 60-year-old planetarium, not exactly new, but killer sound, killer projection, and a bunch of digital artists who just have fun doing this stuff. So some of it's just saying, go, play with this sandbox. We're a museum. We don't have to make money. We just can't lose money. That's right. We're a little different than New Balance. But like a lot of that stuff is just having fun and doing things that are right and inspiring people to, enjoy and open up something that they might otherwise not think of the museum for, or might change a perception. That's fun to do.
Yeah.
This, just to add on, this ties into something that we talked about, which is authenticity, and how I think so often authenticity and approachability get confused, where brands think that they need to be approachable, and that's how consumers are going to want to partake in their brand. But the authenticity part is actually living up to your values and living up to your purpose, and that's what makes you authentic, and that's what draws people into those cool experiences. And
I guess on the flip side of that, when can you tell, or how can you tell if a purpose isn't taking hold? If it isn't quite aligned with either your customer base or the internal audience, which of course is so important, what are some of the telltale signs where perhaps it just needs to be refreshed?
I think the most obvious sign is if you don't see it, it's not a coincidence that Chris Davis's opening this morning began with the first two words of our purpose statement. We saw the slide of independent since 1906, and so you have to be seeing it. This can't be something that you're glad when it's done because it's done. And treat it like a white paper. And in my experience, I've been in marketing for 20 years. I've been part of purpose-driven copy exercises before, and they stayed copy exercises. And so if you're not seeing it, you got to go back and say, okay, what's wrong here?
And Jeff, you mentioned something about when you hear it's being played back by customers, from customer service people, all the way through from the founder of the company through to the customer service people, through to the engineers, whoever it is, that it's being repeated back and played back, and people can hear it, can really have a sense of ownership over it.
Yeah, as well. Your purpose exists. It's not like, again, it's not. I don't mean to be redundant on the idea. It's not a creative process, but it exists. And if you don't have a purpose statement and you're thinking about, okay, what's the best way to get there, I would start with your associates. We've all joined organizations, by choice. We've stayed by choice. We have a reason, and I think what you'll find is that, especially if you ask people to write it down, is that it can get emotional, it can get poignant, and therein could be the beginning of a purpose statement.
That's right. Fantastic, thank you. And Jeff, I'm going to stay with you. I think particularly given that we are at an event focused on sports and sports marketing, how important is sports and purpose in sports, and what role can that really play for communities?
That is a great question. If you look at it's obviously critical. Okay, so if you look at the work that our foundation does, it's about getting children moving. If you look at the work we do commercially, and I'll go back to your jacket, and good luck this fall, by the way.
I'm going to need it.
But the New York Roadrunners puts on the New York City Marathon. They also put on almost daily activities for kids in New York City. That's what drew us to them. And the work we were doing outside of our commercial activity is what drew us to them. And so sport is a common language everywhere in the world. And oftentimes people are driven to sport for very emotional reasons. And so our purpose kind of threads right into that reality.
That's great. And New York Roadrunners is an amazing organization. Great that you're supporting them, partnering with them. And Todd, you mentioned how your purpose is helping drive the growth of the museum. It's kind of being a North Star as you look to expand over the next few years, particularly with online services as well.
Yeah, when I was in advertising, I think when clients came and said, hey, we're for everyone,
Right.
Everyone's like, oh my God, I don't want that client. Nobody, if you're for everyone, you're for no one. And when I got to the museum, I was like, wow, I think I found the one place where it's actually true. And so to answer your question a little differently, for us, it was, okay, we can run an awesome museum, but if we want to change the world through STEM learning, we need to go to where people are and be relevant in ways that are interesting and fun. And so taking that to curricula with EIE, that became a way to get in the classroom. But I'll take another example for our business model to answer this. We are partnering with Roblox in January of 2023. We're working on it now. Why? Roblox has 44 million users per day in the platform. So what is their platform? Multi-user, you collaborate on problem solving to do something cool and fun. Sometimes that's just flip, crazy stuff. What we're going to do is use NASA data, our storytelling, and challenge kids to figure out, how do you live on Mars? How do you feed yourself? How do you get home? What are the challenges? All these things. And so we're a content curator in that role, and we bring something of value. Filament Games knows how to make cool games, and Roblox has the community. So that combination is an interesting one for us, because it says our business model, or our mission, if I use that, inspiring a lifelong love of science in everyone. Well, where is everyone? If you're looking at 7 to 11-year-olds, if any of you have kids or family, they're there. And if they're not there, they're over in Minecraft, bouncing between the two in Discord. So this is a way that became an organizing principle of what to say yes to, and then in our case, what to say no to. Sometimes that's funders that want to desperately pay us to do something. The answer is often no.
That's interesting, because you could interpret your purpose as being something which is very open and as you said, it's everyone, and therefore it could feel overwhelming. But it seems like it's actually allowed you to make some choices, or helps you to make some choices. It's great. So we've established. We haven't. I think it's well established that purpose can be very, very valuable. Should every company have a purpose statement? Is it right for everyone?
I think every company should have a purpose, but the purpose doesn't have to be world-changing. And so it's articulating, back to the HBR article, it is just articulating what your purpose is, knowing that they're not all going to be grandiose.
Yes, right. And you hit the nail on the head, Jaclyn, earlier with authenticity. It's something we've heard a lot about today, but really you can tell. You can tell when it feels authentic, feels true to the business. I'm going to end, before we open up to the audience, by just asking, what are your hopes for the future of brand purpose? Where does it go from here? Any hot takes?
I'm anticipating purpose is going to take a real front seat in recruiting. And I, speaking personally for a minute, our oldest is going to college in the fall, and I know that when she gets out, she's going to look at companies in a way very different than I did, than the way my generation did, and I would even submit even 10 years ago. And so if you're not thinking about purpose both explicitly and implicitly, you're putting your company at a real deficit, and I think that deficit is just going to get wider in the next 3 to 5 years.
And I echo that. I think one thing it also helps do is, I'll just keep using the museum example. If we're for everyone, we need to be hiring everyone, and we need to be collaborating on experiences that reflect the community we serve. And I think that's true, certainly of museums. It's probably true of most businesses, is figuring out, how do you weave in belonging in really authentic ways? And it's not with statements, and it's not publishing web pages about your deep commitment. It's just doing it with people and actually going above and beyond to overcorrect for what are structural challenges in this. So I think weaving that into purpose is important, and that will be a super, it's just a hard area that needs to be reckoned with.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that's exactly how we think about it, and using the purpose as our starting point for being more inclusive and actually creating impact and doing things, taking action in ways that matter.
Thank you guys so much.
All right, I think we are ready to wrap up. We have 2 more sessions, so I think we're going to keep the show rolling. Let's give everybody a big round of applause.